In this video, I'm going to continue on and do a little bit more repair work on my single fin surfboard. If you're just watching this video because you want to install a vent plug, follow along. Just giving a little background information. This surfboard here that I made myself, I had an issue with venting, so it bubbled, left it in my car. You can check out my other video on that. Anyways, I'm going to install another vent in it because I think my other vent failed. So I got these new vents and I'm going to place it in one in the front of the board. So I'm going to add one up here. And the vents I'm using are these guys here. And let's see if I can focus in here. The make of them are Milvent, and they're a Gore-Tex vent. But what I like about this vent, it's also got a removable plug. I got a whole bunch of these from Aliexpress from China. The reviews I've read on them seem pretty good, so I'm going to give them a try. But what I really like about them is you can remove the center. So what it has is an opening in the bottom, and then there's a Gore-Tex, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a Gore-Tex membrane in there that allows, when the board starts off-gassing, it allows the air to escape the foam. So if you have that's really important for an EPS board. So what that means is the Gore-Tex allows the air to come out, but it keeps water from coming in, just by the way it works, kind of like the Gore-Tex raincoats or jackets. But the plug, there's also a plug in, so if you leave it somewhere really warm, it vents completely. So that's what I really like about this, is that it's removable. So you can take out the centerpiece, so when it's installed in the board, this actually has direct access right to the foam. However, you do not want to leave this plug out when you go surfing, because water will get in there and the board might get waterlogged. So don't do that. Alternatively, you can just leave it in and it will still vent automatically with the Gore-Tex. So that's what's really nice about these. So I'm going to install one in this. So the tools required, I made this little template here. I need a hole saw to drill a hole because I'm retrofitting this into the board. So I'm going to clamp this board down and then drill the hole using this hole saw. I guess I should focus in on this. So I'm going to use this hole saw that's the same size as this vent. And I have this piece of plywood here lined up where I want the vent to go, and I'm going to use this to steady the hole saw because I can't have the center tap drill bit to center drilling because it'll drill through the board. I'm also going to mark the depth using some tape all the way around. I'll do that here in a bit. The tools required, some type of maybe router. I have my DeWalt laminate router here, or a cutout tool like this guy, or you could even use a Dremel. So I have a RotoZip bit in this so I can use to cut out the inside. Because my stringer is a piece of plywood, it's a little tougher. If you have a regular board, it's probably got some type of basswood or balsa wood or something. And once you drill your hole, it's easy enough to remove the foam and to snap the stringer. But in my case, because it's plywood, it's pretty robust, so I need to actually router that piece out down here. The other thing is, it's important to install your vent right at the center of the stringer so it's in contact with both sides of the board, because the stringer is a very good, isolator to keep the two sides of the board separate chambers. So if you install it right on the stringer, it'll allow gas to escape from both sides of the board. So I'll zoom in here to show you what it's going to look like. So I have a spot here where I want to install the vent. I have this piece of plywood which I've already pre-drilled with this I guess template hole. I'm going to put this in a drill and I'm going to drill down once I mark the depth. So to mark the depth, I'm just going to rough it probably about there. So that gives me a rough spot, so I know that how far to go. Next I'm going to load it into my drill and drill this out. Okay, have my hole saw into the drill. Now I'm going to drill this out. I also have this board clamped down. I only really need this to get this started. Once it's started, I can continue on drilling. Also, I'm going to run the drill bit on reverse because it cuts a little easier. If I run it forward, it just gouges. So run your hole saw in reverse. So now that I have it started, I'm going to remove the clamps so I get the proper depth now. So I've drilled it all the way down. So I peeled off the fiberglass here, just so that when I router it's a little easier and doesn't throw fiberglass dust everywhere. And I drilled it out. I could have just routered it out, but it just makes a bit of a cleaner cut. I've taken my multi-tool here, or my router tool, and I'm just set the depth. I'm using this cutout tool because my other my router is on the fritz. So that's about right there, so I've already set that. I'm going to turn the vacuum on and router this out while I vacuum, just to keep the dust down. Alright, I think that's fitting pretty good. Yeah, that fits really nice. Right like that. So, what we're going to use to install this in to the board is you can't just take this and epoxy it in, because if I were to dump a bunch of epoxy in here, like installing an FCS plug, like this one here I have for a GoPro mount, what ends up happening is the resin is going to squeeze up in through here and it's going to block the hole, which renders this plug useless. So what we're going to use is this plastic epoxy. It's this epoxy putty. This type here is made by JB Weld. This is the plastic weld. They got all kinds. There's a steel weld. They probably all will work, but this one in particularly apparently is better for plastic, so this is the one I'm going to go with. I've used this stuff before, so it's really easy. It's a stick, it's a putty, it's like clay, and all you do, cut off the amount you need, knead it, and I'm going to wrap it around this, and then squish it in, and then it will bond to the rest of the board, and that'll pretty much make it tight. What I might end up doing is throwing a little bit of epoxy over the top here just to ensure a watertight seal, but this is going to do the majority of the holding. So I'm going to set up. I'm going to cut off a piece, figure out how much I need, and then I'll knead it and install it. Something you should do is rough up the plug beforehand. I got some really coarse 60 grit here. I'm going to rough this up so that it has good adhesion to the epoxy, so the putty has a place to grab. And then I'm going to wipe it down with some alcohol, acetone, some type of solvent to clean off any oils that might be on your hands or anything. So you want this roughed up really rough like that. So the rougher the better. I've given this some thought, and I realized that in order for me to ensure a watertight seal, what I should do is I should have some epoxy resin on the top here. Once it's plastic, the plastic putty, epoxy putty has set this in, I'm going to put a layer of resin in here and blend it in with the rest of the board just to ensure a watertight seal. So what I did was I routed out a little bit more, maybe about 1 millimeter down, so that you can see here there's a lip, and I'm going to fill this with epoxy and then blend it in with the rest of the board. So that will ensure a watertight fit. So I just thought I'd mention that before I use the epoxy putty to set this plug in place. So what I'm doing here is I have some alcohol here in a jar, pure alcohol, and I'm going to wipe down this, wipe down the plug. Let it dry and it'll be ready to go. So I'm going to start kneading some of this epoxy together. I have a pair of gloves on, just it makes it a lot cleaner so I don't get it all over myself. So I'm just going to do a quick test to make sure I have enough. other thing I did was I clamped the vent down by using some clamps and a piece of wood here. And all I did was I used a piece of wood and some clamps, and I stuck a socket on the valve so that would hold this down. The wood holds that down. So what ends up happening is it clamped this down. So now that it's set, I'm going to mix up some epoxy and focus in here. I'm going to mix up some epoxy here just to fill this little ridge, and then this is ready to go. It'll be all done. So the last thing I'm going to do now is put a little epoxy just around that lip there. So I'm just going to, I cut out a piece of tape here to fill this hole at the bottom, just so that I won't get any epoxy in the screw in the bolt hole. I can peel that out later, should any get down in there, just as a precaution. What I might do actually is just put another piece of tape on top here and just cut out around it, just to make sure, because I'm not going to go all the way to the edge anyway. Okay, so I've mixed up some epoxy now. Just a little bit, just to touch up all the way around. And what this will do is it'll also seep into the, if there's any little bit of opening between the vent and the board itself, it'll seal that up. So I'll get a nice fit here, and that should do it. So I'm just going to feather this out a little bit. I'll sand it a little bit once it sets, and this vent is done. And that is how, hopefully, that is how you retrofit one of these plugs to a board. I'll let this set and come back, and that'll be done. It's ready for the water. So this is tacked up, and I'm just going to remove the tape while it's still somewhat soft, because it makes it a lot easier than removing it once it's fully hardened. So I'm just going to cut this out with an X-Acto knife. So once this fully sets up, I'm just gonna sand it, and it should be good once it's sanded flush. In fact, I could leave it right now and just ride it. It's probably, it's good. So, this is all cured up now. It's watertight. All I'm going to do now is just sand this down and blend it in. I'm just going to use my little oscillating tool here with a sanding pad attached to it. You could just hand sand this and it's done. So I'll do that right now. So that's looking pretty good. So all that's left to do is put in the plug itself, and this is done. Now if I really wanted to, I could just grab some automotive clear coat polish and just polish this to blend in the rest of it, but that's done. So now I'm ready to, if I need to make sure it's vented well, I can remove the plug completely, or again, this has the Gore-Tex built into it, so it'll vent as needed. So okay, that's it. That's how you install one of these vent plugs or retrofit it into a surfboard.